The question that I want to ask today is a big one. Is America still possible? That is, can we still have this country the way the founders intended it? So today's episode, I wanted to share with you some of the stuff that I talked about with the Publius Fellows at the Claremont Institute where I work. Every summer we do these fellowships. It's one of the best and most important things, I think, that Claremont does. We have the Publius Fellowship, which is for sort of college-age students and people just out of college. And then we have the Lincoln Fellowship, which is for people who are already sort of established in their careers. And both of them are, we have other fellowships, by the way, but those are the two kind of, in my view, the really core ones. And both of them are devoted to giving people a firm foundation in what Claremont sees as the essence of the American idea, and equipping them to go forth into the world, influencing people, holding political office perhaps, or writing, or whatever it is that they go on to do, with that fire in their hearts, with that sense of what America truly is. And so I was really honored to go and talk to the Publius Fellows this time around because, first of all, they're incredible students. They are going to save the Republic, I hope. And second of all, it's just really, I talk so much about education as shaping of the soul, right? It's just the most important thing, I think, that any conservative or any conservative organization can do right now is reach young people and equip them to go forth into this very, very crazy world that we are currently living in. And so that's, by the way, when people ask, like, what can I do? If you are in a position where you have a gift to coach or educate kids, to take kids under your wing, whether it's your own children or whether it's like as the coach of a sports team or a homeschool teacher or anything, right? Like that is one of the best things that you can currently do in our present crisis for the world. People like me who talk for a living and who do these kind of flashy podcasts and everything, it can look like, oh yeah, those are the real fighters for the Republic, right? Spencer's out here writing and speaking and whatever. But what we really are, the people who work in media, are the standard bearers. We are cheering people on and giving them hopefully guidance and direction. But the real fighters, the people who are truly going to win this battle for America is you, right? The people in the home, in schools, who are teaching kids and engaging at a personal level with the people who will eventually inherit this country. So that's, to me, the whole point of all this, right, is you are on the other end of that line. And I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to cheer you on in your important work. So that's the first thing that I want to say before I dive into this question of can we still do America and what would that even mean? Let me tell you about my buddies at Mini Moustachery. You need to get your beard in order. Even if you don't have a beard, men, you got to pay attention to your grooming. It's no fair letting your facial hair grow all scraggly and gross. Nobody likes that. Mini Moustachery is your one-stop shop for everything you need to have a luxuriant beard or a nice clean shave. They sell a bunch of really high quality conditioners, oils, balms, waxes. It's really easy if you're just scrolling Instagram to get suckered into buying crappy stuff or stuff that doesn't quite do what you need it to do. But Mini Moustachery is the real deal. They have everything. They have it in a bunch of different scents. I particularly, if you want my recommendation, love the Ragabrash. But really everything they make is extremely high quality. So here's the deal. When you go to minimoustachery.com/heretics and you use the offer code heretics, you get 25% off everything in their store. Tons of stuff, right? Shampoos, combs, brushes, whatever. minimoustachery.com/heretics. Use the offer code heretics to get 25% off. One more time, it's minimoustachery.com/heretics and use the offer code heretics to fix your face. The way that I want to get into this question is by going back to real basics because, man, America's in trouble. I never lie to you about that, and I really do think that we have entered into a serious crisis in this country. I mean, when like Los Angeles is entering into its, what, 12th lockdown or something, when the Biden administration is making noises about partnering, quote unquote, with SMS carriers, that is, with the people who send your text messages, and deciding whether you're saying the right thing or not about the vaccine, when they really want to insert themselves into every crevice of your life, we have obviously lost the plot, right? And usually the way that that's presented is, well, it would be nice if we had all of these freedoms in the Constitution, but it's just not possible anymore, right? That's why I asked, is America possible? Because it's like, well, the Second Amendment says that you need a gun to protect yourself against government encroachment, but you're not going to overthrow the government. I mean, Biden said this just the other day, like, you're not going to overthrow the government. You would need nukes to do that, right? And it's funny how the people who seem to really dislike America, who think America is racist, that it was founded by evil white people, those are the people who are also telling you, oh, like America's kind of out of date and America's not possible anymore, right? Now, that seems to me like I smell a rat, because when somebody is telling you that something's not possible, but they really don't want that thing to happen, that makes me feel like maybe it is possible and they're trying to just dissuade you from even thinking about it. So let's think about it today, and let's think really at a very basic level about what it means to have what I sometimes call a regime or a small c constitution, to have a political community that is stable and that is oriented toward what is called the common good. And that's a phrase that people get scared about sometimes because they think it's sort of authoritarian. It's not. It's just the question, how does a community live and work together for the benefit of everybody? One of the crucial texts that we can look to for answers to this question is Aristotle's Politics. We've talked a little bit already about the Republic, which is sort of the, really kind of parting shot of Western political philosophy in some ways. And we're going to keep talking about the Republic as we go through the different books. But today I wanted to focus on Aristotle's Politics because, Aristotle is really good at getting to the heart and the essence of things and laying it out, right, in these very sort of cut and dry terms, because he was a great theorist. That is, he was excellent at looking at the world as it really was. He didn't try to force the world into his theories, but he then drew these kind of generalizations that really worked and still work. Remember that at this point, right, Aristotle is not talking into the Greek world that is at its height. So we sometimes imagine, oh, it's the classical period, right, when Aristotle, the great, genius who is talking to Athens at its highest power. But that's really not true. Aristotle actually is teaching and writing at the very brink of what's called the Hellenistic era. And Athens at this point had already lost the Peloponnesian War, gone through the oligarchic upheavals that I talked about, which ended up indirectly causing the death of Socrates. And Aristotle himself had lived a kind of rough life. He'd been bounced from city to city. He was born in Stagira, which is in the Macedonian region of Greece, that's sort of northeastern. And the reason that's important is because Macedonia was where Alexander the Great came from. And Alexander the Great, during Aristotle's lifetime, would arise to take over, really, the known world. And so Aristotle knew what it meant to be a polis, that is, without a city. A polis is a city, and it becomes for the Greeks not just, like a town where people live, but really the essence of a political community is a polis. It's where we get our word political, right? Politike. Aristotle's polis, his hometown of Stagira, was destroyed by Philip II, Alexander's father, while Aristotle was studying under Plato in the academy. So Aristotle at this point is in Athens. Stagira is razed by Philip II. This is very, very close to Aristotle's heart, I would imagine, for a number of reasons. One, because it's his hometown, but two, because Philip employs his father. Aristotle's father was a physician for Philip II. So this is a very complicated and painful situation that, like, the world is kind of crumbling, a lot like our world is kind of crumbling. Stagira is razed in 348. Plato dies in 347 BC. Aristotle leaves Athens, travels to Asia Minor, gets married, and really sort of begins to establish himself in the wake of these very unsettling developments. In 343 BC, he was invited to tutor Alexander, and we don't really know that much about it, but it does seem to have been like, his entry into his invitation into the Macedonian court, which would soon conquer the world. And it's after that he goes back as what's called a metoikos, that's a resident alien in Athens, and he founds the Lyceum. So he's kind of a little bit stateless, and he is teaching these young, ambitious people, Alexander included, how to orient themselves in a world where everything that seemed certain is kind of becoming unsettled. So it's a world a lot like our world. And that's one of the reasons I think why it's so valuable to look at what he says in answer to these questions, right? What is politics? Why do we do it? How can we do it well? And how can we do it not just for the sake of our own power, but for the sake of the good? Remember that was central to Republic I, right? Was that rulers are rulers not insofar as they hold power, but insofar as they use that power for the good of the people that they rule. And even if they are monarchs, if they are aristocrats, or if it's a democracy, nevertheless, right, you can still make that distinction. There are good versions of that and bad versions of that. One of the biggest threats to our American regime is tech censorship and tech surveillance. One of the best ways to protect yourself against that is ExpressVPN. You might not know this. You might think, well, I'm just a private citizen. I'm just browsing online, right? There's like all sorts of people that are watching over you all the time. And there are data brokers whose sole business is to buy and sell your data. So you do need to protect yourself against this stuff. It's no joke. A great way to fight back against that is ExpressVPN. This is a program, a really easy to use app, basically, that reroutes your connection through an encrypted server so that data brokers can't sell your IP address. ExpressVPN is a way to guard yourself against that. I use it whenever I go online. It's super easy. Phone, laptop, smart TV, whatever. All you have to do is tap one button and you're protected. Here's how you get it. Go to expressvpn.com/heretics and you'll get 3 extra months of this for free. Your data is your business. It should be protected. Go to expressvpn.com/heretics, expressvpn.com/heretics, and you can get 3 months for free. Check it out. Now, Aristotle, and we've discussed this before, Aristotle thinks that personal character, personal moral formation, is kind of the basis of good politics. He thinks that before people go into politics at all, before any of his students undertake to rule others, they must learn to, in some sense, rule themselves. And that means studying the Nicomachean ethics, which we've already talked about, right? This gradual shaping of the soul, and what's called habituation, to love the good, to seek the good, and to shun evil, right? And the reason for that is that ultimately, right, those are the people who are going to desire what is good for the right reasons and are going to desire the good also of the people in the political community. You know, Aristotle's a bit of an elitist. So sometimes people like us get sort of grossed out by the way that he talks about this stuff. But the thing is that even if you're in a democracy, right, there are still people who have to live by the rules of that democracy, including voters and citizens, but also including people who don't yet have the right to vote. So kids, for example, right? Children have to live under the laws that are made by the voting public. And so whatever kind of a community you live in, you're going to be writing laws that everybody has to follow if that community is going to work and live. And those laws are in turn going to shape how kids grow up and how their character is formed. And this is one of the reasons why I harp all the time on like wokeness in elementary schools, right? Wokeness in elementary schools is evil, not just because wokeness and the idea, for example, that like whiteness is bad, or the idea that like, you know, there are 57 genders is not just evil because it's anti-human and turns us against one another and ourselves, but also because it shapes those kids to be confused about that stuff. And those kids then grow up and they form you know, the voting public eventually. And so there's this loop, right, that Aristotle sees and outlines in the Nicomachean Ethics, which then leads up into the Politics. These two works are kind of together in one. And so your personal character, your character in Greek, which is like the stamp that's put on your soul, the way that it's shaped and formed, ultimately becomes kind of the building block of your political character, of the character of the regime. And the regime, when I use that word, what I'm really doing is I'm translating a Greek word, politeia. So now we have all of these words that are from polis, right? Polis being the city where people live together and make those rules and live by them. And one of the things that Aristotle is concerned to ask is, what exactly is a politeia? What's the essence of being a city? What is cityness, or just being a political community? And remember, I said when we talked about the Republic that politeia is the word that Cicero then translates as res publica. So the title of Plato's work is Politeia. The subject of Aristotle's Politics is what a politeia is. This is a crucial concept for thinking about politics in general. Aristotle has an answer to this that is based on a central question of Greek philosophy, which is it enough to just like have sort of matter? Is something itself because of the matter it's made out of? Or is there something deeper and bigger than that? So let me first read to you, a lot of the passages that I read are going to be from book 3 today. And I'm going to first read a passage from chapter 3. If you're looking at Becker pages, which are the kind of canonical way to catalog Aristotle's work, this is 1276 A to B. And I'm reading my own translations today because I wrote them for the talk that I gave to Publius, and I thought you might like to hear my translations. Aristotle says, if the same people of the same race inhabit the same place, should we say that they are one city, that is, one polis, even though new people are always dying and being born? Is it as with rivers and springs, which we are accustomed to call the same, even though new waters are always flowing in and out? Or on this account, should we say that the people are the same, but the city is different? So this is a primordial question of Greek philosophy, and I've talked about it before. It's really the Heraclitus question. So Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic philosopher who poses one of the central questions that Socrates ends up answering, right? Heraclitus says, you can never step in the same river twice because the water is always flowing in and out. The water is not the same, so the river is not the same. And Socrates kind of invents what will become Aristotle's answer too, which is no, even though the matter, the stuff that the river is made up of changes over time, the form is the same. That is, there's something recognizable about the way that this river is configured that makes it recognizably the same. It's in the same place, and if it moves gradually so that we see that it has moved over time and we can record and understand that. And there's something that is coherent about that that enables us to say, this is a thing. And there is something also coherent about a political community that lets us say, this is a thing. We can look, just because people live in the same place doesn't make them a political community. But the fact that generations of people come and go and live and die doesn't mean that they're not a political community. For, and this is Aristotle again, he says, for, if a city is some shared enterprise, and the shared enterprise of the citizens is the regime, that's the politeia, then the city must become different in kind when the regime becomes different. Just as we say that a chorus too is different when it goes from being comic to being tragic, though often it is made up of the same people. It is the same way with every other shared enterprise and every other composite thing. If the form of the compound becomes different, for example, a scale made up of the same notes becomes different when it goes from the Dorian to the Phrygian mode. And so indeed we must say that a city is most plainly the same when we consider its regime and find it to be in the same state. Let me tell you, I am now like buried in public goods stuff. I've just got like everything that they make because everything that they make is awesome and it's all super clean and well made. The packaging looks great in my kitchen and in my bathroom and everything. But more importantly, like there's just not gross additives in it. I'm a big health nut and I love knowing that everything I'm eating or using on my hands is like not made of 1,000 different chemicals that I can't pronounce. I love their almonds, their chocolate covered almonds, but they also have like soap, which is really great. My cat, Chad Cat or Tank, loves their cat food. And you can get all sorts of stuff from there. So what you do is you go to publicgoods.com/heretics. And if you go there or if you use the offer code Heretics, you get this incredible deal where you have $15 off with no minimum purchase. So that means you could just get a ton of free stuff. Publicgoods.com, publicgoods.com/heretics, or use the offer code Heretics. You get $15 off all of this amazing stuff. Cat food, human food, soaps, all sorts of extra stuff, and none of it has gross additives. Publicgoods.com/heretics. Aristotle can be a little tough to approach sometimes, but he's saying something crucially important here, which is, yes, people live and die. Just like the water in a river comes and goes, people live and die. But that doesn't mean that the political community that they live in goes away because the political community has a form. It has a recognizable way of doing things that passes on from generation to generation. The same could be said of America. We are no longer English colonists, right? We have had many, many generations of history and change and things that have happened to us. But if we preserve the traditions and the philosophy, and most importantly, the capital C Constitution, the rights in the Constitution, the way of living in the Constitution, if we preserve those things, then we remain America. We remain the same politeia, which is to say the same regime. And now you'll notice, right, we make a distinction between our capital C Constitution, which is the written document that says what laws you can and can't make and how our government is structured and all of these things. But we make a distinction between that and our small c Constitution, which is really just another word for our regime. And the regime, that is the way that people live together, their traditions, what you might call their folkways, right? The celebrations that we have, the festivals, the sort of typical ways of living, those come before the Big C Constitution. In some ways, our Big C Constitution is an attempt to distill and formalize the kind of political community that we already were at the time. We already were people who believed, for example, in English common law. And that goes all the way back to like Magna Carta and all the stuff that we've talked about, right? Where people, where barons were rebelling against oppressive kings and asserting the rights of Englishmen, of English nobles, which the founders then asserted also. All this predates our Constitution and informs it and shapes it, right? And so our Constitution, Big C, is like our written formal distillation of our Constitution, small c, without which we can't survive, without which we are not the same political community. If those ways of living, if those habits of life, if those beliefs in the inalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness go away, right, then we are no longer the same polis, the same kind of political community. And so that is why Aristotle asks, right, like how do political communities change? Well, not when people die and are born, that's just normal, but when people change and reshape and deform the ways that they live together. And so, when people talk about norms, right, you hear about, our democratic norms are under assault, right? That can become kind of a meme, but there's a real thing underlying it, which is that the norms are really the ways that we do things. So even if people sometimes make the argument, well, Twitter is a private company, right? So Twitter can just censor people if it wants. But then you say, well, wait, Twitter now owns the political discourse, controls it. And by banning people, for example, the president of the United States, right? Twitter has effectively shut the president of the United States down. Even if according to the current structure of particular laws that we have on the books, that's not clearly a violation of the letter of the law, it is a violation of something much deeper that precedes the law, and that is our belief in free speech and in free and open discourse and in people's ability to express themselves and not be silenced. And so that small c Constitution, that regime, that way of living is under threat, even when the big C Constitution doesn't specifically outline how to handle it, right? And this is why I'm so upset about wokeness, right, is because it aims to get into kids' heads and deform the way that we live together and our love for just doing America, just being Americans together, speaking freely, electing our representatives, being capitalists, right, having free enterprise, right? All of these things are under assault from these woke crazy people who want to unmake and change the nature of our regime. That is the underlying core ways of living together. So I'm going to read one more passage now from Aristotle before I talk more about what those American ways of living together are. So here's chapter 9, 1280b. Clearly then, says Aristotle, a city is not just a common physical location that people occupy, even if they do so for the sake of trade and refraining from injustice toward each other. So just living together and trading and not hurting each other is not enough. These things must exist if a place is to be a city, but the mere existence of them all is not sufficient to make it one. No, there must also be a shared enterprise of living well together, both in households and in clans, for the sake of a complete and self-governed life. This will not come about unless they live in the same place and intermarry. That is why marriage alliances came to be in cities in the first place, as well as family allegiances, festivals, and all the other pastimes of living together. And this is a work of friendship, for friendship is what it is when people choose intentionally to live together. So then the purpose, that is the telos, a word we've talked about a lot, the purpose of a city is living well. And all of this is for the sake of that purpose. Now, I want to dwell on this, right? This is a work of friendship, philia. It is an act of love to build a political community together. Sometimes you hear talk of civic friendship. I've talked on the show about civic friendship before. The sense of fellow feeling that you have when you walk out into your neighborhood and you see your fellow Americans, right? That too is eroded by wokeness, by this idea that we're enemies, naturally enemies of each other because of our race, right? The reason that's such a terrible, pernicious idea is because it erodes our civic friendship, our natural desire to love one another, regardless of our race, regardless of our origins, all of this stuff. We, as members of a political community, still, I think, have an impulse and a desire to get along with each other and to have shared ways of life and shared rituals. I mean, even something so silly as a baseball game, right? The reason that that's America's national pastime is because those things are important. They're where the glue that holds us together comes from. And John Adams famously said, right, that our Constitution was only made for people who had that strong glue of being a moral and religious people. So I'm going to get into that now a little bit more, right? What does it mean to be the American people, to have that civic friendship, those ways of living together? So John Adams, famously irascible, cantankerous, lovable old guy, and one of the greats, right? One of the founding fathers, wrote a long letter to the Abbé de Mably, who was a French intellectual, very popular at the time. People haven't really heard about him anymore, but John Adams had a correspondence and relationship with him. The Abbé de Mably undertook to write a history of the American Revolution. And Adams, in his irascible way, basically said, that's a huge mistake. It's a huge mistake because you can never understand, and you don't have the documents, you don't have all the newspaper clippings and everything that you would need, and a lot of it hasn't even been made public yet. So don't even do it. But if you did it, here's some advice. And so on the 15th of January, 1783, he writes this letter. Adams publishes this letter 3 times in his lifetime, so he must have thought it was important. I'm going to read to you now a really striking passage in which I think Adams outlines our politeia, our form of being together, our way, our regime, the thing that undergirds, because remember, this is before the Constitution, right? This is the Revolutionary War. He says, this is how we lived together, and this is how we won the war. He says, let me close this letter, sir, by giving you a clue to the whole mystery. There is a general analogy in the governments and characters of all the 13 states. But as the controversy and the war began in the Massachusetts Bay, the principal province of New England, their institutions had the first operation. 4 of those institutions should be studied and fully examined by anyone who would write with any intelligence upon the subject, because they produced the decisive effect, not only by the first decisions of the controversy in public councils and the first determinations to resist in arms, but by influencing the minds of the other colonies to follow their example and to adopt, in a greater or lesser degree, the same institutions and similar measures. So a couple things to note here before I get into what those 4 institutions are. And I'm saying there's 4 institutions that won us the war, and they weren't all exactly alike in every place because there were 13 colonies. It's a big, already America was a big place and a diverse place, right? But there was an analogy between them. What does that mean? Well, it means that Aristotle's sense that the form persists, right? The politeia can be the same even over time, even as things change, even as people die and as time passes, right? Also is true in America across geography. Not only do we have generations that come and go in America, we also have a lot of territory and a lot of different ways of doing America. Vermont is not the same thing as New York, you know? And yet, he says, there is an analogy, and that analogy is the politeia. That's the form, right? You can take a circle and you can make it out of bronze or wood or clay. It's still a circle. You can take America and you can do it in Vermont or New York or Rhode Island or California. It's still the same. There are still recognizable patterns. And this in some ways was an answer to the Baron de Montesquieu, who had basically raised this question, right? Well, all republics before ours happened in this very small space. How could America possibly have a republic all throughout the world? Well, this is Adams' answer. You take that Aristotelian form of the thing and you make it by analogy in all these different places. So what's the essence of it? What's the heart of it? The four institutions, said Adams, are 1, the towns, 2, the churches, 3, the schools, and 4, the militia. So these are 4 institutions, right? The towns, local government, the churches, religious belief, the schools, education, and the militia, self-defense. Now, that is an amazing list of the essence of America, and it's also a list of everything that is currently under assault by our ruling class. This is why the ruling class is so pernicious, why wokeness is so bad. It's because they want to unmake all 4 of these things. Local government, they don't want you governing yourself. They've just recently put out an article, I think it was in NBC, right, that there's a dark new trend that people who couldn't get Trump reelected are now turning to this other thing, and that's running for local election. Ooh, you might govern yourself, right? They don't want that. They think you are, as my friend who wrote this amazing thread, Martyr Maid, recently said, they think you are beneath representation. So that's the first thing, the towns, right? The local government, they don't want that. Churches, sorry, it's really a public health threat, right? And we've seen the extreme prejudice with which churches and religious institutions have been closed, whereas liquor stores remain open, right? Because they don't think this is important. They don't think it matters. And we think, the people who believe in the American regime think, that this is the essence of what America is. They think it's outdated, it's all silly, it's foolish, they want to get rid of it. The schools, well, critical race theory, right? They're here teaching you that everything about America is wrong and evil. Why? Because the schools are another place that if they can corrupt, they can unmake the American regime. And the militia, well, they definitely don't want you owning guns, right? They're going to outlaw guns. Why? Well, first of all, you can't take out the US government with guns anyway, they say, but also it's dangerous and evil for you to have them to begin with. Let me read a little bit more about what Adams has to say on these subjects before I talk a little bit more about like how we can recover them. The towns, he says, are certain pieces of lands or districts of territory into which the Massachusetts Bay, Connecticut, and New Hampshire and Rhode Island are divided. Each town contains upon an average 6 miles or 2 leagues square. The inhabitants who live within its limits are erected by law into a corporation or body politic. He's describing the structure of these local institutions. And he says, it was in the town meetings that the sentiments of the people were first formed and their resolutions taken from the beginning to the end of this controversy and war. Talking to each other, talking to your neighbors, organizing together in political community, DMing each other, right? Speaking directly, face to face, and figuring out what really is on your mind, getting on the school board, running for local office, right? These are the things that give people ideas and that make them free. Because if we can talk to one another, then we can cultivate that civic friendship. Anybody that will meet with me in a town to think about how we can best resolve to govern ourselves. You know, I don't care if that person like voted blue one time. That's not the point. The point is, this is your fellow American. You are bound to him in civic friendship. And how are you going to govern yourselves, right? How are you going to protect yourself against the predations of the federal government? So like, you know, sheriffs that didn't enforce COVID measures that are still standing up against oppressive COVID lockdowns, right? There's an example of local townships governing themselves, and the founders meant for it to be that way. They meant for you to have that safeguard against oppression from the federal government. And that's encouraging to me because it means they knew that the federal government could get just as oppressive as it's gotten. And they gave us safeguards. Local government. 2, the churches are the religious societies which comprehend the whole people. Each town composes one parish and one church at least. Most of them have more than one, and many of them several. Each parish has a meeting house and a minister, supported at its own expense. Now, this is an interesting one because basically Adams is saying like everybody went to church, right? This was just the backbone of the civilization. And this is the one that's most scary to me because he says that without that, you can't have our Constitution. It depends on a strong moral fiber among the people voluntarily. And you can't force people to believe. I know that, right? I can't reach into your heart and change it. Only the Holy Spirit can do that. But I do think that we need to be aware of the need for this, and we ought to be trying to believe. This is something that I think we get wrong, right? A lot of smart people are currently realizing, Douglas Murray, Dave Rubin, Jordan Peterson, right? All of these people are realizing that whether you believe or not, our world is built on belief, right? Our society is built on the creator who endows us with our inalienable rights. if you don't believe in that creator, if you don't believe there's a God, you're not bad, right? I'm not condemning you for that. But I am saying you should want to believe, and you should try. You should try by prayer, you should try by talking, and you should try by going and meeting with people who also want to believe and who want to try. It's your civic duty. Sorry. I mean, I know that that's like not PC to say, but you should try. I mean, if you can't, I have every sympathy with that. I understand that sometimes terrible things happen, cause us doubts, all of these things. But our default should be, how can we restore the moral character of our religious people? 3, the schools. This is almost an advertisement for this show, this paragraph. The schools are in every town. By an early law of the colony, every town consisting of 60 families is obliged under a penalty to maintain constantly a schoolhouse and a schoolmaster who teaches reading, writing, arithmetic, and the rudiments of Latin and Greek. To this public school, the children of all the inhabitants, poor as well as rich, have a right to go. Well, you've heard me rant about this so many times now, right? That ain't critical race theory. The rudiments of Latin and Greek, reading, writing, arithmetic. It's close to the trivium, the classical education that I was talking about, and the quadrivium, the sort of mathematical, philosophical education. We must reestablish this, and we must get critical race theory out of our schools as thoroughly as possible. The Christopher Rufo trend, where parents are going up in their school boards, in their local communities, and chasing this stuff out, the laws that are on the books, the attempts to take this stuff down, all of this is good. It is flatly evil and will destroy our politeia, our political community, to teach kids to hate one another on the basis of race, to hate America because of its history, to hate American history and the country that they come from. It's the opposite of philia, the opposite of civic friendship, the opposite of the American politeia. This is why all of this, you listening to this show, you going forth into your school and taking charge of what your kid is taught, all of that is so central to the crisis that we're in. 4, and finally, the militia comprehends the whole people. By the law of the land, every male inhabitant between 16 and 60 years of age is enrolled in a company and a regiment of militia, completely organized with all its officers, is obliged to keep at his own expense, constantly in his own house, a firelock in good order, a powder horn with a pound of powder, and so on and so forth. He details all of this stuff that every male had to have, right? Which is like, whoa, you could never do that now, could you? And this is one of those things, right? They have their strongest argument here because things really have changed. Warfare really has changed. Fighting, weaponry, all has changed a lot since the 18th century. And so it's true that you couldn't field this kind of a militia against the US government. And so Biden uses that to act as if the Second Amendment just like isn't a thing anymore. But the idea was never that you should have the same weapons as the US government, right? Or, I mean, they didn't have the same weapons as the British government when they went up against them. The idea is that the people should be allowed, constitutionally allowed, have a God-given right to get their hands on forms of self-defense that will enable them to seriously protect their own rights, their own land, their own property. And that is not like an insurrectionist thing. It's not a dangerous or dark thing to say. It's simply asserting the basic, fundamental, core essence of our politeia, and that is that you have a right to what is yours, and that means that you get to defend it. Now, are you going to defend it with a Havelock or 12 flints and 4 and 20 bullets? No, right? Things have changed. And there's actually serious thinking to be done about what kind of weaponry is most effective. But I will point this out just as a kind of suggestion or a roadmap, right? The government is not going to nuke you. No matter how bad the federal government is, it's not going to drop a nuke on its own people. So Biden's actually being ridiculous. That's not what warfare would look like in the 21st century either. A lot of the aggression that they are doing is digital. They're not coming for you with guns. They're coming for you with lines of code. They're trying to tax your Bitcoin. They're trying to get into your text messages. They're trying to go door to door and see if you've put the vaccine in your arm, right? They are trying to worm their way into your life. And a lot of that has to do with the technology, the new digital technology that they're using. That's a kind of warfare too, and a kind of bearing arms. You also have a right to think about how you could thwart that technology, how you could use a VPN to protect yourself, how you could potentially even mount a bigger defense, right, against that kind of warfare. Don't tell me that's not possible when nearly a month ago, somebody hacked into one pipeline and practically like crippled our fuel system. And like 6 months ago, right, a Reddit thread brought the entire world financial system to a screeching halt, right? This sort of stuff is possible, right? Digital technology does enable personal and groundswell resistance to institutions that make out to be the most powerful thing in the world. We can defend ourselves, but we do have to do some thinking about how. That too is essential. I'm going to close on one hopeful note by reading a passage from a new book review in the Claremont Review of Books. And so yes, you can get this by going to ClaremontReviewBooks.com, or you can subscribe and get a physical copy in your mailbox. This is by Charles Murray, who's a very celebrated scholar of a bunch of things, but of genetic distributions and of meritocracy and of just the structure of American life in light of scientific evidence. He writes in this review, he says, "For the past 31 years, my wife and I have lived in a small town 15 miles from Frederick, Maryland, a city of 71,000 people. Because of my wife's civic involvement in Frederick, it's fair to say that we have met nearly all of Frederick's movers and shakers. Many of them grew up in the Frederick area, few of them attended elite schools, and none of them shows any signs that they think of themselves as anything other than ordinary Americans. The civic life of Frederick in 2021 is energetic, optimistic, and fueled not by government, but by a network of local voluntary associations. Alexis de Tocqueville would recognize it as a direct descendant of the American civic culture he described in the 1830s. I don't think Frederick is exceptional. The traditional American civic virtues are alive and well in small town and small city America. Those communities are beset by some of the new problems that afflict the nation, especially increased drug addiction and family breakdown. But they are approaching these problems as Americans traditionally did, and local institutions continue to function as they traditionally did. I will repeat what I have written elsewhere because it has been my dominant thought for the last decade. The great divide in the United States is not political or racial. It grows out of the immense difference between daily life in the big cities and daily life everywhere else. That difference amounts to a chasm dividing Americans' experience of their country. It also lies behind the political polarization that is tearing us apart. What Murray is saying here is that our people, our American politeia, still exists, even though you are being told by every legacy media institution that it's over, it's outdated, it's done, it's bad, right? The people who live and work and vote in towns like Frederick don't have access to a column at the New York Times. They can't make Netflix shows that portray their lives as they would like them to be portrayed. And so the media and our entertainment industry creates this haze of illusion as if our whole world is the way the crazy autocrats in the big cities want it to be. They imagine this universe where we all hate each other, where we're all, where people in the middle of the country are dumb and stupid and drug addicted and they suck and they can't govern themselves. So we need Daddy Biden to sail in and clamp down on all of it. None of it is real. The American people still have the American politeia in their bones, the instincts, the desires, the loves, the philia, the civic friendship that built this country, that won the Revolutionary War, still lives, and it lives in you. All you have to do is take ownership of it and refuse to be talked out of it. Yes, we can still do America. America is still possible, and we are going to win, my friends. Let's do the mailbag. Hey guys, I want us to make sure that we have a rock solid way to keep in touch, a connection that you and I own that nobody else can touch or destroy. That's why I'm inviting you and encouraging you to go to youngheretics.com and drop your email, just so that we have an email list of the folks that love this show and love the West, and we can talk to each other. That's what I want to make sure we can do as all this big tech stuff goes crazy, as they can snap their fingers and make us evaporate like that. This is a way to ensure that we won't lose touch and that we own the relationships that we've built here with this show. Youngheretics.com, drop your email, make sure we can keep in touch. Okay. Mailbag questions come to me through locals and they can only be asked by VIPs. It's a really wonderful community over there that I founded basically to take this show deeper and to take it out of the reach of big tech. So if you're not already, I highly encourage you to join us at youngheretics.com/locals. Here is a question from Locals VIP John, and it's a good one. Would it be moral to lie to the government, e.g., say I have a religious objection to getting vaccinated? He's talking about the COVID vaccine, obviously. I actually think that absent all the politics, all of the polarization, all of the crazy, like, this was an amazing scientific accomplishment, the creation of this vaccine. And the way that we are now, that our state is now weaponizing it against us as a means of control, makes me completely appalled. According to my personal compass, now different philosophers will give you different answers about this. At a certain point, when the government so abandons its legitimacy that it is no longer asking you to do something on any kind of good authority, I do think that you would be entitled to lie to protect your safety. So, for example, the famous question, right? If the Nazis are at your door and they're asking you whether, like, you have any Jews in your house, it's my view that that's illegitimate by virtue of your God-given right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and the God-given right of the Jew that you are hiding in your home, right? That person, that human being made in God's image, has a God-given right to life. It's being infringed upon by the state. At that point, you don't owe the state anything. And personally, I am a moral pragmatist about this sort of thing. That is, I do think that you that certain things are more important than your honesty. And sometimes I feel that this sense of purity conflicts with actually doing good. So let me explain what I mean by that, right? Like, if you are so enamored of your own honesty that you tell the Nazis that you've got Jewish people in your basement, right? Then you've placed your own virtue above the good of your brother. And I don't think that the Gospels teach that. I think the Gospels say, leave your offering on the road, and before you make it at the temple, go and settle your score with your brother. I think that Jesus always put the moral realities of the inestimable value of human life above your own personal purity. So I think that sometimes you have to, like, make these queasy choices and terrible choices. These things are tricky, but I hope that answers your question. And thank you, John, for asking it, because it's fascinating. That's it for me. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you like this show, you will love the Claremont Institute, where I work. We put out 2 publications, the Claremont Review of Books and the American Mind. American Mind is online at americanmind.org. And Claremont Review of Books is also online, but you can subscribe and get it in a physical copy. Go to claremontreviewbooks.com to pick it up. If you would like to support our work, Recovering the American Idea, and I've basically been talking a lot about the kind of work that we do and sharing with you some of the stuff that I was telling our fellows just recently, so you get a sense of what that is. I think is really important. I think it's the important project for us right now. Go to claremont.org/donate and let them know in the notes that you heard about Claremont through Young Heretics. Thanks again for listening. I will see you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.